One. Bam! Look at that. Yeah. Episode
Another episode.
425, maybe, of A to the show, and we're traveling around the world. We got me in New York now, Ali in Kuwait, and Vidya
Yeah.
in Dubai. Vidya Balachandar, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Vidya. I'm a South Asian. Well, I'm saying South Asian because that's part of what I do now, but I'm essentially a food writer and editor. I'm the South Asia editor for Whetstone Media, which is an American food media company, and currently the editor in chief of a very newly launched magazine called Rasa, which is all about South Asian foodways. So that's essentially me, and I live in Dubai with my husband and my dog. I hope he won't
That's
walk into the frame, but he
if he does, we get to say hello. If he
Yes.
doesn't, that's unfortunate for us. But yeah, welcome to the show. So, what got you into food writing?
um, actually, it was purely circumstance. It was completely by accident. I've been a journalist for many, many years. And
Right.
in 2011, when I'd already been working in India for quite some time, I got the opportunity to be part of the team that launched BBC Good Food magazine in India. I had never done food writing in any capacity before that. And in fact, at the time, I really wanted to be a travel writer, but it was just an opportunity that I couldn't pass. So I kind of embraced it and decided to see where we'd go because it was an international food magazine launching in India for the first time. And I learned, I started with good food. It was super intense, but very, very, very quickly into my role there, I realized that it was such a natural fit for me in that I have always loved food. I had just never considered writing about it. And this was the perfect opportunity to
Mhm.
find an outlet for something that I'd always liked doing. So, yeah, that's how that came to be.
Oh wow! And when you start, like, how did it start off, right? So you like food, and
Yes.
how did you start writing about it? Like, what was the first things you were writing about it?
To be honest, my first day at Good Food, I had absolutely no idea how I was going to write about anything. Like, I was just so nervous because, I feel like at the time and even now, so much of food writing is thought of as a very high, let's say, as something that is the preserve of a few and people who have the right language, who obviously have the right taste, the right connections, go to the right restaurants. And I wasn't sure I fit into any of that. I mean, I've always loved food, but I've always loved it maybe independent of restaurants as much as I love eating out. It's also just about food for its own sake, and the fact that food allows you to tell stories, which is what drew me to it in the first place, I think. So I really just stumbled in, quite honestly. It was not like I went into it with any particular method in mind. I had already been a journalist, and I just used the lens and the viewpoint that I'd already had as a
Right.
journalist, and I just applied it to food writing, which is exactly what I continue to do even to this day.
Hmm.
And I guess I just demystified that world for myself and felt really passionate about doing that for other people as well. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Oh wow! So
Not
you
bad.
combine journalism with food, and there you go, food journalism.
Yeah,
Pretty
Pretty
exactly.
cool.
much.
And were you like reading any like food journalism when you first started? Would you have any inspiration, like anyone who inspired you to do this?
Yeah, of course, I think.
Hmm.
I think it was only after I started, and I'll be honest, like it was only after I started writing in about food and I became involved with food on a day-to-day basis, thinking about it, writing about it. It was only after that I actually began to think about it seriously as a discipline because for many, many years before that, I had been a reporter in Bombay. I was a features reporter. I was writing stories about the city, and I think that I hadn't thought that, oh, one day I'm going to be a food writer, so I better think about how I'm going to study it, and the study has actually been super organic. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say that Anthony Bourdain inspired me, but honestly, um, that didn't happen until much later, and I'd love to tell you the story. When I did actually meet him in Sri Lanka many, many years later, but
Wow.
but that didn't. It was not like I started off with this idea that I was going to do any of what he's doing, or that I was inspired by, what he was saying. It was basically just curiosity that led me to where I am. I mean, there are some great books that you can read, and there's of course amazing literature out there. There are people who have written wonderful things about food journalism, but so much of what I know has purely been curiosity and has purely been, yeah, I guess, just digging
Right.
and just
Just
continuing and
exploration.
persisting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Seems like you just
absolutely.
explored and it was something you were interested in, fell in love in, and you
Yeah.
kept exploring. I mean, on the top of Anthony Bourdain that you brought up, I do really love his show, and I love how he travels the world. I love that I get to watch his show and see like the different cultures and the different countries, but then also see the different food. I feel like I get so much out of it. Um, what was yeah, you said you were inspired by him. What and how was that being inspired by him? And then you said you finally got to meet him. What is that story?
So, in 2014, my husband and I, who met, we met in Bombay. We lived in Bombay like pretty much half of our adult lives, and then we decided to move to Sri Lanka, which was a very, very interesting experience. I lived there for 5 years. But it was also the time when I really established myself as a freelance food writer, which is something that which I was clear that I wanted to do at some point, because I just really needed to find my voice, I think, as a writer, as somebody who was engaging with food outside of a publication, and I wanted to do that. So I moved there and I kind of began to write very extensively about Sri Lankan food and culture, because quite honestly, it was a way for me to understand um, what I was experiencing. And writing has always been the way that I work out everything that I'm going through in my actual life, and I was in a new country where I didn't know anybody, I didn't have any friends, and it was all completely new. So it was food writing was a way for me to was a channel for me to understand the newness of this adventure that we had embarked on. And in that process, I think a few years into it, um, I guess by the time I had made a name for myself, because I had been writing for a lot of international publications. I'd been writing for Roads and Kingdoms. I had been writing for Saveur and a whole bunch of publications. So I think Tony Bourdain's producers had read some of my work, and they were going to shoot a season of Parts Unknown in Sri Lanka. That would be his last season.
Wow.
And they got in touch with me, and they were like, they wanted me to weigh in on the episode in terms of food, just because I'd been writing so much about it. Um, and then I kind of was a consultant on the show in terms of bouncing ideas off of them, editorially, just giving them suggestions on where to go. And in that process, I actually got to meet him. I interviewed him actually. I was supposed to kind of meet him and be on the show as well, but unfortunately, he fell sick and that couldn't happen. But I think for me, it was so much more to be able to interview him. And I think that was when I finally I think, when you've been reading the profiles and when somebody is so well known, you really don't know how much of it is tangible, how much of it is real, how much is constructed. Like you just don't know. And I think it was in that moment and in those, in that hour that I spent interviewing him, that it all began to make sense in some way. And for me, I mean, it was a great opportunity because I challenged him. I was like, and it really helped that I was not a fan, like I was not a fangirl at that point at all. So it really helped that I was just able to say, hey, you get to kind of travel the world and do this job that most other people would kill for. But what about your privilege? I mean, and you are a very privileged person. And it was nice that he enjoyed the challenge, I suppose. And he was like, I mean, he was completely aware of his privilege and completely aware of the fact that he had this opportunity because he had the backing of a major network.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I mean, the fact that he passed just a few months after that also had a very profound impact on me in terms of being able to finally maybe see what he represented and what, like, I think when you're on this side of things, when you're the one doing the writing, you don't always think about the reader, or you don't, at least, you don't get a sense of what you're writing or what you're presenting may mean to somebody who's consuming it. And I think that it gave me the opportunity, the unique opportunity maybe, of being able to do both things, of both being the interviewer and being the reader or the viewer in some sense, understanding what his way of showing of navigating the world actually truly meant. For so many people who may never be able to go to those places, but obviously he gave them the license to dream about doing that.
Right. And
Honestly, I think he deserves it because he actually, he worked hard, I think, and he fought for his chance and got it, right? Is that not how he became the privileged person he is or was? I'm not sure. Is that how did he become Anthony Bourdain?
No, I think, look, I mean, we have to talk about the fact that he was a white man and he was a chef. He had written a best-selling book. And yes, he fought his demons and he fought them very publicly. But that doesn't mean that institutionally I mean, if this was a black woman, let's say, or a brown woman, I mean, somebody from South Asia, let's say, who probably had a similar journey and had a similar voice and had a similar skill, talent, whatever you want to call it, the institutions that allowed him to get to ascend to that level of fame, they may or may not have enabled somebody who was a very different, who was a person of color in quite the same way. And I think that that's why it's important for us to always talk about privilege, and something that we especially do, and especially for me is something of great interest professionally, but also in just what I do, because I think getting the chance to tell our own stories in our own voices without any interlocutors, that's very, very important. And that's what I aspire to do.
Yeah, but there are black women who are famous for being chefs. It's. I don't think it's white privilege or anything to do with that.
There are black women who are famous chefs, but if you look
Yeah.
at the absolute numbers, they are not anywhere comparable. And having been steeped in the dining, in the food scene, I mean, it's not like I have an extensive knowledge of the United States or the
Let
culinary
me.
culture there.
See, this is the beauty
But
of this podcast. We can Google it. There are a
yeah, but
bunch.
the numbers are nowhere comparable. I
Mhm.
mean, and just in terms of the kind of systematic barriers that we have to face. And I can talk to my experience, like, especially as an Indian, I can tell you that I have enjoyed a great deal of privilege because of caste, and because caste is such a big issue and it's such an important way. I mean, in the modern day, a lot of people like to think that it's not relevant, but it continues to be relevant at every level. And I'm deeply privileged because of that, and it's something that I only actually fully came to terms with, a few years ago, because these are not the kind of conversations we were having back when we were growing up, even though we should have. But I have had the enormous privilege of caste privilege. But I also know that for a woman, like, to just be able to do what I'm doing now, where I'm in the position um, of curating stories from our part of the world for an American or a major international media company, and to be able to do that with complete freedom, and to be able to say that these stories are important. I mean, for me, back when I was a freelancer, one of the things that used to frustrate me so much is that if I was pitching a story from Sri Lanka, and when I was pitching a food story from Sri Lanka, there may be 2 or 3 stories in a year that I get to do that are from about this part of the world that is hugely complex, that has such an interesting layered history. because
Right.
that's the quota, that you assign for South Asia. Like, oh, we've had our one Indian story for the year, we've had our one Sri Lanka story for the year, and now I get to be in a position where I'm like, no, we have like dozens and dozens of stories from this part of the world, and we
Mhm.
deserve to tell it. And I think to be able to get to this position is not something that is easily possible for most
Yes.
people,
And it
and
takes
that's what I
hard
mean
work.
by
Mhm.
I assume it takes hard work and dedication to get
Right.
there. Therefore, you deserve this privilege because you worked hard for it.
I don't think it's the same thing. It
Mhm.
cannot be.
How?
No, it's not.
It's the
No.
channels. I don't think they're like now you have the internet,
I mean,
anyone can post anything.
this
But
is like,
Pretty much,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, back
exactly.
in the day, years ago, a few people were controlling, and there were only a few people that got selected. So it
Absolutely.
wasn't as democratic as it was now.
And there was no Netflix, there were not so many people producing shows. There was not so much money being pumped into shows where people get to travel the world. I mean, if there was, then there would be so many other Bourdains, right? There was only one. And it's
I
not
can
just
think
because
of I can think of a few
such
Who can you
as
think of? Yeah, exactly.
that traveled the world and tasted food. I mean, Gordon
they're
Ramsay
all
does
white
it.
men. I can
No,
tell
that's
you
You say
that's
this.
Gordon
true.
Ramsay.
Most
Yeah,
of them
that's
were
true.
white
That is
men.
a white man. That is a white man. That's true.
Oh yeah, Gordon
I
Ramsay.
fair enough. Fair
See?
enough. That's true. No,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. But wasn't there? What was that
I mean,
guy? The
I remember
Ainsley,
watching
is that his
Discovery
name?
Channel, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
They were like, you watch Discovery Channel, and as much as you loved all the shows where these guys get to go to these places, and a lot of them are super personable, really interesting. And I think that even before I got to know who Bourdain was, I was already watching these guys, and already I was like, okay, this is really interesting, and that's exactly why I wanted to be a travel writer. I mean, who doesn't want to be a travel writer is the other question, but
True.
um but
Very true.
I don't I don't remember. I mean, the majority of what we were watching were white men who got to, do live the life that we've all dreamt of, or go to these places sponsored by a company or a channel or a network. So, I mean, I think things are definitely changing now, and I'm not going to debate the fact that things are different now and that there's more access for people. And there's and I suppose that there are the opportunities for, if you have the talent, and if you're lucky, if you work hard, etc., etc., there are more channels for your work, or for you to find your way to an audience, let's say. But that was
Yep.
definitely not the case a few years ago.
Hmm.
So I look back and dread on the past when the future is bright and full of promises,
Yeah. No, it's
right?
true. Yeah, well, the thing with YouTube and stuff like that too is that anyone in any part of the world can, you know, make their own content and travel around the world, and
Pretty much.
it is pretty cool that anyone, as long as you're good and talented and hardworking and stuff, you really can.
Do
Um,
anything.
of course, there's like more systematic
uh
things where people get pushed
yeah,
more forward, right, based on their background. Um,
for sure. I think it
mhm,
depends on what kind of storytelling you're talking about. It depends on, I mean, it depends on a lot of things, and I don't. I mean, and this is not to. I don't want to keep like, it's not like I want to be the privileged police in any way, but also like I think it's. I think, but I think my job also, like as a journalist, also forces me to question
mhm,
the fact that we think that these things come easily, or that they are easy, but
mhm,
they aren't. And the ability to tell a story. Yes, anybody with a microphone and an internet connection can do that, but that you're still talking about, especially in a country like India, you're
mhm.
still not talking to the majority of the people who we are not. Like, I think it's very easy to believe that because it's easy for a few of us to be able to access these things, that that's the way the world is. But the world is unequal, and
Mhm.
and
You
access to these things is, and so it's important to always keep that questioning framework in mind, but not necessarily always kind of dwell on it, I think.
are so from your experiences traveling like around the world in South Asia. First off, for me, the term South Asia a little bit triggers me a little bit because it's like I know that South Asia is so huge and there's so many different
Yeah.
cultures and
Why
stuff
does
like
it
that.
trigger you?
because when someone's like, "Yeah, I got this little spice from South Asia," I'm like, "What do you mean South Asia?" It's like, is it
You
from
want
here?
to be
Is it from there?
specific?
Yeah,
I
sure, why not?
suppose so, yeah.
It's a little weird, man. It's like saying all of Arabia, or saying, the Middle East, or saying
That
like
wouldn't
East
trigger me
Asia.
if someone said that. Like
Um,
all of Arabia, I would be like, yeah, cool.
all right, but in terms of, right, okay, I got the spice from like turmeric, for example. This came from whatever part of the. They say that it came from the East, and it's like,
But
okay, but
technically
Yeah.
speaking, it did.
right, but technically speaking, it's not all of the East. Russia is part of the East, China is part of the East, and you really have to break like. I like there's so like even just within the small uh like South Asian countries, all around, there's so many and they're so different, Danny. They're literally so different. It's like,
Yeah.
so for you to put them all in, like, yeah, this is just one monolith. I mean,
Honestly,
the whole
if
world is
I'm
a
if I'm
monolith at
being
that
honest,
point.
the only difference I see in South Asia is India and Sri Lanka and the surrounding countries because their foods are kind of similar. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Are they not?
Mm, okay, this is a really good question. South Asia is tremendously diverse, and you have a very, very strong point when you say that people use it in a lazy way to define a really broad geographical, cultural,
Right.
geopolitical, cultural area. And each country, I mean, Pakistan, there are regional cuisines in Pakistan that I have no idea about. Having, even though India and Pakistan were technically one country until 1947, there are parts of India the cuisine bears absolutely no likeness whatsoever to the North Indian cuisine, which passes off as Indian food in most parts of the world. South Indian food is tremendously diverse. It's similar to Sri Lankan in some ways, but Sri Lankan food is extremely different in its own way. The Maldives is its own thing. Then you have Bangladesh, which is also super unique. So I think that a good way of thinking about South Asia is that yes, it's most definitely a term that is used because it's easy to classify this region of the world. I don't take a huge amount of offense with to it, but that's also because I have the luxury of being able to actually engage with each of these cultures through the course of what I do, and therefore I know how they're distinct from each other, and the fact that we have a space where we can represent stories from this part of the world allows me to say South Asia while knowing that I know the granular difference between each of these places. But having said that, there definitely is a laziness to how South Asia or how these countries are represented, particularly in the Western media. I'll give you a very good example. Sri Lanka has been going through such turmoil for the last few months, as I'm sure you know, because of the political situation. And because I lived there for 5 years, I also follow Sri Lankan news very closely. And I think so much of the frustration with activists and journalists I know in Sri Lanka is with parachute journalism, where you have a Western, like you have somebody from the NYT or somebody from the Guardian or any major news outlet, right?
Right.
Virtually every news outlet was in Sri Lanka for the last 2 months, because until the last president was thrown out, like everybody was so interested in what was going to happen. Um, Virtually everybody is kind of, it's almost like you parachute in and you get a super basic understanding of what's happening, and there are inaccuracies in what you actually put out in the world, like um I mean, it could just be a matter of phrasing, but it could the phrasing makes it say, like, for instance, there was I remember this, there was something about the former prime minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was forced to leave by the people, but there was a casual throwaway phrase that he was
Um,
forced to flee because protesters threatened to, because protesters ran his house and whatever, ransacked it, and etc etc. And the fact is that the protests have been largely peaceful. But the fact
mhm.
is, if you do not understand the nuance of what's happening on the ground, because you're just not spent sufficient time getting to know the place that you're reporting about, or because you have a cursory understanding of it. It's just one of so many countries that you cover from the outside.
But yeah, would you mind
Um,
giving us like a bit more context into the situation? I'm not too familiar. I know there were things going on
okay,
in Sri Lanka and the president, but you can help us with the context here. Yeah.
sure. So I mean, I'll have to kind of go back a little way because the beginning of this year, it became clear that Sri Lanka was headed into an economic crisis, which is
Hmm.
still ongoing and unfolding. This is because of a multitude of things, but including the fact that COVID-19 led to a big shrink in tourism revenues, which is a very important source of money for Sri Lanka as a small island country. But also, because of the corruption of the ruling family that the Rajapaksas called the Rajapaksa regime, because the president and the prime minister are brothers, and their other brothers and nephews were also part of this ruling government. Because of overwhelming corruption on their end, the Sri Lanka faced and continues to face a forex crisis, whereby all many sources of revenue and foreign exchange dried up, and citizens were plunged into a day-long power cuts, 13 hours, 14-hour power cuts.
Wow. Yeah.
They face huge difficulties with fuel. At the moment, fuel is the very, very big problem. I was in Sri Lanka like last week, and it's just the capital is just full of people waiting in queue for fuel, which only arrives once in a few days. I mean, not even a few days, I want to say a couple of weeks, because they just don't have the money to pay for any fuel imports. So it's just basically people waiting in line in their tuk-tuks, or people who have left their cars there and gone home and come back 2 days later to see that the queue hasn't moved at all. So there was barely any public transport on the road when I was there. It was impossible to get cabs, impossible to get tuk-tuks. So as a result of this, public dissent began growing against this government and against specifically these brothers who were seen as being the architects of the downfall of this country. So, to cut a very long story short, people were protesting publicly. They peacefully occupied a protest site, which is right next to the presidential secretariat in the capital. And on the 9th of July, there was a huge outpouring of people that basically marched to the president's house. And he was forced to flee the country. He's currently in Singapore. He fled the country and he resigned after he fled the country. They have a new president at the time being. But all of this meant that there was so much going on, the undertones of which could be interpreted in a variety of ways. It's very complex, as you
Mm,
may well imagine.
right.
This was a citizens movement, as somebody called it. It was a hydra-headed movement. There was no leader. There were multiple people who were leading the charge. But it's so easy to be on the outside when you're not from the region, not familiar with the country, to come in and to say, this is what I see, and this is what, like, people. And I think the choice of words is so pivotal here, because you are representing this part of the world to the world at large, and I think that's where the irritation comes. Like, Sri Lanka is not India, India is not Pakistan, Pakistan
Right.
is not Bangladesh. We are all different countries, and we have, and I think that making it seem like it is all one thing is damaging in that way.
It sounds a lot like what's happening in Lebanon too. I mean, I'm from Lebanon, and with the whole inflation and the people rising against the government and activists, and people just no fuel, no electricity. Um, it's a challenging time for like this post-COVID world. Really is a very weird and strange world, and what is like. So, and you're still traveling, you're still doing the food journalism. Um, so I want to ask you, like, when with all this chaos happening and such, like, do you think food journalism plays like a bigger role for people in entertainment, or do you focus more on political journalism or stuff like that in this meantime?
Um, I am not a political journalist. I am
Hmm.
definitely interested in politics. I'm interested in journalism at large, but I'm definitely not. And for me, I think one of the joys of my job is that it allows me to curate meaningful storytelling that has that I mean, I don't want to say that that you can, quantify the impact that anything has, because quite honestly, I don't subscribe to that notion. I feel like every story has its value, whether or not you're
Hmm.
doing impact journalism. Um, but um, but I feel like, like for instance, just to give you an example, we launched this magazine called Rasa in May this year, and one of the stories in the inaugural issue was actually a food story. It was about milk powder and why it's so important in Sri Lanka, because it's used to make tea, and um, it's widely used in place of fresh milk, which is considered a luxury. And the writer found a really great way of linking that to the linking the fact that milk powder is so integral to the tea culture. It's so integral to a social, the way people socialize almost in Sri Lanka. And she connected that to the current shortages, which have made milk powder super expensive.
Hmm.
But she was also reflecting on the Sri Lanka's dairy industry, which was thriving once upon a time, and what all of that means to to the country in its current moment. And I thought it was such a clever, and not just clever, but also unexpected way to talk about something that's happening in the world right now, which is relevant, but by taking a completely different approach to it. And you're talking about milk powder. Nobody would think that the Sri Lanka story can be told through milk powder, and yet we were doing exactly the same thing. And that for me is the great joy of what I do, and that's what makes it relevant no matter what world we live in, COVID or no COVID. There's bound to be, because we have to eat to live, there are bound to be stories that we have to tell about our condition as it is, and how about our world as we see it and perceive it in the current moment, which makes food journalism, in my opinion, completely timeless.
Wow. I see. It's like so specific
Very well
that
said.
it's like timeless. Right.
Yeah.
How interesting. The world
Very
of
interesting.
the world of food
I mean,
journalism. Yeah.
when it comes to food journalism, I really want to ask, are you allowed to have a favorite cuisine, or is it strictly you got to be non-biased with
Of
every food you eat?
course. I mean, come on.
Because
Of
I
course.
could kill for some Indian food right now.
Of course, I have favorites, and of course, like, I mean, if I was doing a review, I would
Mhm.
expect that I shouldn't go in with a very strong notion of disliking the cuisine that I'm
Mm.
going to review. But I don't do reviews very often anyway. I mean, but I think that is important. Like, you need to go into a review with an open mind towards what you're eating, and you shouldn't go in there thinking, ugh, like, I don't want to eat this, and then
Yeah.
saying that you're doing an objective review. That would be a bit ridiculous. But of course, you're allowed to have favorites. I mean, I love Peruvian Japanese.
I don't like
I cook a
Japanese.
lot of in. Oh, really?
I really don't like
I
Japanese
love.
food. No offense to Japanese people, obviously, but I'm not a fan of sushi. I love ramen. Ramen's good, and
Yeah,
those
Ramen's
stuff
really
are
good.
yeah.
Wow.
What else do they have? There's what was that food? Their curries are
they have
amazing,
a whole
but
bunch of things. Yeah,
I cannot deal with sushi. I don't like sushi. I hate it. I hate sushi.
yeah,
But my
but it
favorite
doesn't mean
cuisine,
that you hate.
it doesn't mean that I
But
hate
your
Japanese
favorite.
food. I mean, true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's true.
just you just told me a whole bunch of things that you actually like about Japanese food. So,
I mean, I kind of like ramen. Kinda.
oh, okay.
Curries are good regardless of where they're from. As long as it's a curry,
Yeah,
I'm good
okay.
with it. You know? But
Okay.
when we go to specific, like when I say Japanese food to anyone, first thing that comes up to mind is sushi, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't like sushi. Well, what's your favorite cuisine of all time, other than like, wait, no, I think you said Japanese Peruvian, right?
Yeah, Peruvian might be among my top favorites. I absolutely Peruvian Japanese, yeah. I mean, I just love that combination. I'm sorry, but I really do love raw fish in sushi and ceviche and tiradito and all of those things. So, but other than that, I mean, I cook a lot of Indian food because I grew up, I mean, that's the cuisine that's most familiar. I cook it almost every day. I have grown to love Sri Lankan food over the years because it's a country that's very, very close to my heart. And having lived there for 5 years, it's strange how I actually crave very specific Sri Lankan foods now that I no longer live in the country. And I do have access to it in Dubai, but not as good as in Sri Lanka.
Mm.
Um, but let's see what else I like. Gosh, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank here because I think it's just because I'm so agnostic when it comes to food. Like I have
Mm.
specific tastes, but also I'm just open to a lot of like, I mean, I may be committing some kind of blasphemy here, but I do not like any fast food. Like I don't like McDonald's. I don't care for
Neither do I.
KFC.
KFC, kind of, but other than that,
I mean,
yeah.
they
But
make good fries and they're soft, and McDonald's softies are occasionally really nice. Like when you want something like, when I think I have to. A lot of friends have made this point to me, and my husband's a huge McDonald's fan. So they made this point to me that no matter where you go in the world, McDonald's always tastes the same. And that there's that sense of, which is also kind of not true because
Not true.
it tastes
Coming
very
from
different in
yes.
different places.
Mhm.
been around.
So
I've
I think
seen different McDonald's. Not the same. Not the same.
um
Like in Kuwait and stuff, I remember that like McDonald's we used to go and it used to be a fun thing for the family and there was like a playhouse and it was really yummy food. Maybe it was just my memory. But now that I live in the United States, McDonald's is such like you buy a $2 burger and it's a much grosser feeling and experience than it was when I
May or
lived
may
in
not
yeah,
cause cancer.
when I lived in
yeah,
Kuwait, it was such a luxury
exactly.
treat, you
Yeah,
know? Yeah,
I've tried
exactly.
McDonald's in Spain, in Italy, in London, in the United States, in Jordan, and Bahrain. Where else? United Emirates, and Kuwait. Obviously, Kuwait takes it home, but that's just because we are the
Mm.
Arabian food capital. Have to flex. I really do. But other than that, they don't taste the same at all. I think the worst was Spain. No, yeah, Spain. Spanish McDonald's is just so bad.
Describe it for us. Why was it so bad?
Okay, grab two buns of a sandwich, grab oil, eat that. That's exactly
Ugh.
what it is. It's too much.
Mhm.
But
But
yeah, go ahead.
no, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I didn't want to forget that
Go ahead, yeah.
after eating a lot of Lebanese in Dubai,
Mhm.
eating Lebanese food in Lebanon was such a revelation.
Something
Like,
else.
I was just like, I, because, I mean, even though there's so many Lebanese options here, I find that they're all a little bit one note. Like, everything tastes the same and
Mhm.
everything is super sharp, like acidic. And then I went to Lebanon and I tried
Wow.
the Armenian food, I tried the Lebanese food. I ate really, really well for 2 weeks. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like it was like suddenly remembering why I love it so much. And that is definitely among my top favorite
Lebanese food is
cuisine.
really good.
Lebanese
Yeah.
food is really
Oh,
for
so
me.
good.
If I had to do my top three or top four,
Yeah.
it would be Indian, Persian food, Italian, and then Kuwaiti food. That's how I'd go.
Mm.
Italian's really good too. Yeah.
Persian's an interesting one.
Persian's so good.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good. I love Persian food as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I think I'm the wrong person to ask this of. Like
Yeah.
I'm agnostic in that
Mhm.
like I mean, if
Um,
it was a super meat heavy cuisine, then maybe I would like meat in like, although I love steak and I like, Japan again, if you love steak, like the best beef anywhere in the world.
Wagyu beef goes a
Um,
long way.
yeah, right.
a very long way, like so long. Oh my gosh, like that's
Hmm.
my predominant memory. So strange. from Japan was like going to this restaurant that just does steak, nothing else. Just small pieces of wagyu, which they do,
But
on the
but I
grill.
don't know why, but for me, if I see a restaurant that's like, how do I explain this? A restaurant that has two or three items on the menu, I feel more comfortable in that restaurant knowing that,
I
Absolutely.
agree.
it's just
Hmm.
those three things that are one or two things that they do. So they won't get it wrong if that's.
Yeah, multi-cuisine restaurants are usually a disappointment.
Yeah, I don't go to those.
Usually they are just a mediocre approximation of everything that they claim to serve. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, but in my opinion, like a long menu with many options, usually for me is not a very exciting prospect.
I
It
see.
really isn't.
So, what is? I want to ask you, what are some things that you look for in finding a restaurant? Like, how am I supposed to know? Is it the reviews you find, or is it the ratings, or is it the word of mouth, or is it the menu like you were describing? Like, what's something you look for, or I should look for if I'm trying to like go to South Asia and go to eat someplace?
In a place like South Asia, you should word of mouth actually really helps.
Hmm.
I found that some of the best recommendations I've got for places in India, even places I haven't been to, have been from friends who live there, or like usually on Twitter, somebody starts a thread saying these are my favorites, and usually there are like five there that are really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, I'm just going to give you a tip for if and when you are in South Asia and you want to experience, let's say, really good street food. There are people who conduct professional street food walks, and they're very good, and and those are always. But like, let's say in Vietnam, where they say that the best way to find out is the longest lines at the stall, like when you're
Oh.
in Vietnam, the stall with the longest line and the highest turnover is likely to be the one that does the best food, because the especially also stalls that run for a very short period of time in the day, that shut by 11. I mean, some of it is laziness, yes, but a lot of it is because you're just not selling stuff the whole day, and you prefer to like sell stuff fresh, and then you prefer to pack up and go home. So
Hmm.
there are lots of tips to find these. I mean, this is not restaurants. Honestly, it's a mix of everything. It's what your friends say, it's what you read, it's what you experience. It's a bunch of different things, and ultimately you just have to try a lot of stuff, and then you know what works for you and what doesn't. But in general, for me, I prefer, especially in Dubai, and because I live here at the moment, I would much rather go to a local restaurant that has a really good name for serving authentic something, even if it's one thing, rather than going to the really big name or the big chef restaurants. I mean, of course, there is a time and place to do that. And of course, for celebrations or when, like it's not like I don't go to the fancy places, but I'd much rather go to, like, there's an Iraqi place that serves masgoof that I've been planning to go to for the longest time and I haven't been able to. And that those are the sort of things that would make my list. Or the bakery that has been making Iranian bread for X number of
Mm.
years, like that's the
Mesgoof,
stuff that I'd go for.
mesgoof
Oh
is
my
the
God, I
stuff,
really
I'm
want.
honestly.
hungry.
Yeah. So I
Wow.
think our last question would be, what's the future looking like for you?
That's an interesting one. Personally, I'm not sure how many more years we have in Dubai, because we move every few years, and that is part of the. It's both exciting and a little bit terrifying always, because it's a whole new place to get used to. But for the moment, I'm really enjoying being here because I feel like there are lots of stories that are not been told about Dubai,
Hmm.
especially stories which are not focused on restaurants, not focused on glamour, but focused on real life and people and the communities that call this place home. So I'm really excited to be here, at least for however long I'm here. And professionally, of course, I'm very excited to have this opportunity to be at the helm of this magazine, because it's really such a great way to engage with the part of the world that I know best, and also to do it authentically and not have to perform it for a Western audience. I think that is a huge opportunity and a huge privilege to come back to that word. I'm really excited to have it and to see where that goes.
Well, thank you very much
Amazing.
for your time. I'm really
Yep.
hungry right now.
Thank you so much.
The time
So am
flew,
Same.
I.
honestly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for
All
your
Well,
right.
time.
Thank
thank you so much.
you.
Thank you so much for
See
watching
you.
into the show. If you guys enjoyed this episode half as much as we enjoyed filming it for
Bam.
you, please like, subscribe, and share.
Like, subscribe. Yeah.
We'll leave a link to Vidya's stuff on the description below, her Instagram, her website, all those different stuff. Vidya, is there anything you'd like to shout out or let the world know?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't get that last bit. Oh,
I said, would you like to shout out or let the world know anything?
no, I think that's fine. They can find me. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. You
below.
can pitch me stories.
Wow.
You can write to me. You can find me. All my details will be provided, but please feel free to reach out. And it's been a
Thank you
pleasure
very
to talk
much.
to both of you. Thank you
It's been
so
a pleasure
much.
The
talking to
pleasure's
you
ours.
from our family to yours. Peace, love, and happiness. We'll see you.
Adios. See you later.
Thank you.